I've worked hard for 17 years to support my family, only to discover my wife's betrayal and that some of my kids aren't mine. I've worked tirelessly for 17 years, only to find that my reality was nothing like I imagined. It's the kind of realization that makes your entire world collapse in an instant. The kind that leaves you questioning everything you've ever known about love, trust, and family. It all started innocently enough. My wife and I met when we were both in our teens. We were each other's first loves. And from that early bond, we built a life together that seemed perfect from the outside. I was 18 when we moved in together. And by the time we were in our early 20s, we were already parents. It seemed like we had everything one could hope for: a growing family, a house that we were slowly making our home, and dreams that we were turning into reality. I was the sole provider for my family, and I prided myself on the ability to give my wife and 4 kids a comfortable life. Each morning, I would rise before dawn, prepare school lunches, check bags for school, and take care of our 2 energetic dogs before heading off to my physically demanding job. My wife had chosen to stay at home after our first child was born. She said it was best for the family. And at the time, I agreed. Little did I know, beneath the surface of our seemingly happy home, a storm was brewing. There were little things, red flags I ignored, subtle signs that something wasn't right. Sometimes, it's easy to overlook discomfort when you want to believe that your life is picture perfect. The turning point came when my wife told me she wanted to go on a 2-week vacation with her friends. We were struggling financially, as always, and I had already planned a weekend with my brother, whom I rarely get to see because of the distance. When I told her I couldn't cancel my trip, she said I wasn't helping enough. Despite everything I did, I woke up every morning at 5 a.m. I took care of everything from the kids to the dogs. I prepared breakfast, packed their lunches, and made sure their school supplies were ready. After work, I cooked dinner, helped with homework, bathed the little ones, took care of the dishes, cleaned the house, and walked the dogs again. All this while my wife watched TV, chatted with her friends, or worked on her hobbies. It was exhausting, physically, emotionally, and mentally, but I never complained. I just kept telling myself it was for the good of the family. After that argument, it became impossible to ignore just how uneven our relationship had become. I had been so wrapped up in my duties, providing for everyone, taking care of everything, that I hadn't seen just how much I was being taken for granted. After that fight, I started paying closer attention to my wife's behavior. I noticed how little she contributed, even though she was always at home. I started to notice the way she would leave the house for hours, sometimes all day, without a care for the kids or the dogs. I realized that most of the responsibilities in our household had fallen solely on me. I decided to take a day off work, not because I needed rest, though I truly did, but because I wanted to see what my wife was doing while I was working so hard to keep our family afloat. That morning, my wife came downstairs at nearly noon, shocked to see me home. Her first words weren't of concern for my well-being, but rather about money. She told me I didn't look too sick, and that I should go to work because we needed the income. I stayed home anyway, insisting that I didn't feel well. While we sat together, her phone rang, and she immediately left the room to answer it. I started to realize just how disconnected she was from me, how little she seemed to care about my well-being or our family's well-being beyond her own comfort. The day went on like that. She made excuse after excuse to leave the house, to avoid me, and when she finally came back home that night, she demanded that I cook her dinner, even though I had already cooked and fed the kids. When I refused, she threw a tantrum, storming out of the house to buy fast food for herself, even though our children were asking why they couldn't have any. It was then that I knew something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I had always believed in my wife, that her mood swings, her insistence on not working, and her absence in our family's life were due to struggles she wasn't able to share with me. I had excused her behavior, thinking she was struggling with depression or that being a stay-at-home mom was harder than I understood. But the more I watched, the more I realized that she was simply indifferent. One evening, I confronted her about our responsibilities. I showed her everything I was doing, and I asked her to list what she contributed. Her list was pitiful: feeding the dogs, grocery shopping via an app, and doing some laundry. I couldn't believe it. I knew I was doing more, but I had never put it down on paper like that. It was undeniable proof of how one-sided our marriage had become. That night, my wife demanded I sleep on the couch. And I refused. I wasn't going to be pushed out of my own bed simply because I had pointed out the truth. She tried to physically drag me out. And I let her, not because she was stronger, but because I didn't want to escalate things in front of our children. A few days later, my wife left for her trip, ignoring my pleas. Ignoring our responsibilities. She took off without warning, leaving me alone with our 4 kids and 2 dogs. My brother came to stay with us during that time, and it was the first time in years that I felt some sense of peace at home. The kids were happier, the dogs were more relaxed, and I finally felt like I could breathe again. It was during that time that I learned the truth that broke me. A truth that my wife had kept from me for years. Not all of our children were biologically mine. Only our eldest son was truly my child. And the realization of this betrayal hit me harder than I could have ever imagined. I had raised those girls, loved them, protected them, and provided for them as if they were my own. And they were, in every way that mattered. But knowing that my wife had lied to me about something so fundamental made my heart break in a way I didn't think was possible. The stress of everything, the years of emotional neglect, the lies, the betrayal, took a physical toll on me. Not long after finding out the truth, I suffered a heart attack. Thankfully, my brother was there to call for help. It was the scariest moment of my life. And yet, in that moment, I felt a strange kind of clarity. I knew that I had to make changes, not just for myself, but for my children. They deserved better. And so did I. When my wife returned, she found that I had moved her belongings out of our bedroom. I had closed our joint bank accounts, leaving her only a small amount for immediate expenses. I told her that we were done, that I wanted a divorce. She screamed, she cried, she tried to manipulate me into staying, but I was resolute. My in-laws, who had always supported her, were shocked. My father-in-law was furious with her, and my mother-in-law was devastated. They apologized to me over and over. And for the first time, I saw that they, too, had been in the dark about the kind of person she had become. I moved forward with the divorce, and my wife moved out. My eldest son chose to stay with me, and surprisingly, so did my eldest daughter. She told me that she didn't care who her biological father was. I was her dad. And she loved me. My youngest 2 are still too young to understand, but I know that one day, I will have to tell them the truth, and I'm terrified of that day. But I also know that I have to be honest with them. They deserve the truth, even if it's painful. Since my wife moved out, our home has felt lighter. There is more laughter, more love, and more peace. The kids are happier, the dogs are more relaxed, and I finally feel like I can be the father I've always wanted to be. My brother has been my rock through all of this, and I'm eternally grateful for his support. He's helped me see that I'm not alone, that I have people who love me and who will stand by me. No matter what, this experience has taught me more than I ever wanted to know about love, betrayal, and resilience. I've learned that love isn't enough if it's not reciprocated. I've learned that trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild. And I've learned that sometimes, walking away is the best thing you can do, for yourself, for your children, and for your own sanity. To anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation, please know that you are not alone. It's okay to put yourself first. It's okay to demand respect and equality in your relationships. And it's okay to walk away when those things aren't being given to you. I never thought I'd be here, a single father, raising my children on my own, but I'm happier now than I have been in years. And for that, I am grateful. There are many lessons that life has taught me through this painful journey. But perhaps the most important one is that resilience is a choice. You can choose to be broken by the hardships you face, or you can choose to grow from them. I chose to grow. I chose to fight for my children, for myself, and for the life that we all deserve. I hope that by sharing my story, others can learn from my experiences. If you find yourself in a similar situation, if you feel alone, taken for granted, or betrayed, know that you have the power to change your circumstances. You have the strength to stand up for yourself and to demand better. Because you deserve it, and so do the people who truly love you. The road ahead won't be easy. There will be challenges, and there will be pain. But I know now that I'm not alone. And that makes all the difference. My children and I are building a new life together, one filled with love, respect, and hope. And for the first time in a long time, I can see a brighter future ahead. Family and fiancé pressured me to reconcile with my dad, who left for his new family. But I refuse. Now, I'm left feeling isolated. Family. It's a word that can mean different things for everyone, sometimes love, sometimes warmth, and sometimes pain. My story is about all three, and how they twisted together into a tangled journey I never expected to take. Let me start at the beginning, with an event that shattered everything I thought I knew. When I was 13, my world as I knew it ended. My father, a man I once admired and trusted, walked out on my mother, my sister, and me. He didn't just leave, he left us for another family. The woman, Janet, wasn't just an affair partner, she became my father's priority. And it wasn't like he tried to make it easy for us. Instead of staying and working on our family, he packed up and moved in with her. They even had a child together, my half-brother. Suddenly, our once happy family was split in two. In the early years, my sister and I would still see my father on weekends. To be fair, he wasn't a bad father at the beginning. He took us out for fun activities, tried to keep us entertained, and made an effort to stay involved. But everything changed when Janet got pregnant and gave birth to his son. My father's priorities shifted, and we were no longer the center of his world. The weekend visits became shorter and less frequent, and my father's attention was always somewhere else. He missed my school performances, my sister's competitions, and everything in between. When I was 16, Janet decided to relocate for a better job opportunity. My sister and I begged our father not to go. We pleaded for him to stay, to choose us, but he looked me in the eyes and said, "I need to prioritize my family." That word, family, cut deeper than anything else. It was like we were no longer family to him. With that, he moved 10 hours away, and I knew that whatever relationship we had left was over. I decided that day that I wasn't going to keep letting my heart be broken by someone who clearly didn't want me in his life. I stopped answering his calls, refused his invitations, and cut off contact completely. My sister, on the other hand, kept in touch with him, though it was strained at best. I didn't care anymore, I was done with him. I moved on with my life, graduated high school, went to college, built my career, all without him. Now, at 33, I was engaged to a wonderful man named Larry. Life seemed to be moving in the right direction. But then, out of nowhere, my father came back into town. He and Janet had returned. And suddenly, he wanted to reconnect. He reached out repeatedly, even contacting my sister, my mother, and even my friends. He wanted to meet, to make amends, to be a part of my life again. I ignored him, but he didn't stop there. He reached out to Larry, my fiancé. And that's when things began to unravel. Larry had always known about my strained relationship with my father. I had told him everything, and I thought he understood why I didn't want my father involved in my life. But Larry is the kind of person who wants to fix things, who believes in forgiveness, and who thinks everyone deserves a second chance. He listened to my father's side of the story, heard him say how much he missed me, how he wanted to be a part of my wedding, and Larry fell for it. He started pushing me to reconcile. "Your father loves you," he would say. "He's trying his best." But to me, it was too little, too late. The pressure from everyone around me was immense. My mother, my sister, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends, even Larry, all told me that I should forgive him. They said he had made mistakes but that he was still my father. But how could I forgive someone who had abandoned me, who had chosen someone else over me? It wasn't just about the past, it was about now. He was forcing himself back into my life, disregarding my boundaries, acting as if he could just step back in after years of absence. One night, after Larry pushed me again to meet with my father, I snapped. I told him that he wasn't supporting me, that he should be on my side, not my father's. He looked me in the eyes and said, "I can't support you when you're being cruel." That word, cruel, stung. He said that my father was heartbroken because I wouldn't see him, that I was being unfair, and that everyone else could see that except me. I left that night, not knowing if I would come back. Eventually, I agreed to meet with my father. I thought that maybe if we could come to some sort of understanding, he would leave me alone. I told my mother to set it up, and within minutes, my father was at the door. He was desperate. I could see it in his eyes. He wanted me to join him in family therapy, to give him another chance, to let him walk me down the aisle at my wedding. But I had my own terms. I wanted him to leave me alone, to stop contacting my friends, to keep Janet away from me. My mother mediated, and we came to an agreement. I would go to 3 therapy sessions with him. And in return, he would respect my boundaries. It didn't last long. Just 3 days later, my sister invited me to dinner with our father. And when we arrived, he wasn't alone. Janet was there, along with my half-siblings and my grandparents. He said that if we were going to mend our relationship, I needed to accept Janet and my half-siblings as well. I tried to leave, but he grabbed my arm and wouldn't let go. Everything erupted. I started yelling. My sister defended me. Janet got involved, and it ended in a screaming match. My sister even slapped Janet. It was chaos. After that night, I knew I was done. I blocked my father, refused to speak to my grandparents, and cut off anyone who tried to push me to forgive him. My sister, who had always been close to my father, finally saw things from my perspective. She stopped speaking to him and Janet and refused to let them see her children. My mother, too, supported me and promised never to force me to talk to him again. But things with Larry were still unresolved. He had gone behind my back, talking to my father, making decisions without me. I didn't know if I could trust him anymore. When I confronted him, he broke down in tears, apologizing, begging for another chance. He promised to stand up to his family, to cut contact with my father, to put me first. I wanted to believe him, so I agreed to postpone the wedding rather than cancel it entirely. But deep down, I knew things had changed between us. A week later, Larry met with his family to explain the situation. When he came back, he was different. He was agitated, unsure, and he tried to convince me that his family only wanted what was best for us. He said he couldn't cut them off, that he loved them, and that he couldn't control their actions. He said his father would speak to my father to ensure he acted appropriately around me. That was the final straw. I realized then that I could never trust Larry, not with my heart. Not with my future children. Not with anything. I canceled the wedding. Larry begged me not to. Swore he would do anything. But it was too late. He had made his choice. And I had made mine. I needed someone who would stand by me. Not someone who would cave to pressure from others. I moved out of our shared apartment and went back to my mother's house. I needed space to figure things out. To heal. To move forward. Meanwhile, things with my father escalated. He kept trying to contact me, showing up at places he knew I would be, trying to force a reconciliation. My sister, who had always been more confrontational than me, took to social media to call him and Janet out. She posted about everything they had done, every time they had hurt us. And it spread like wildfire in our small town. People started talking, and soon, my father's reputation was in tatters. Janet, too, became a target of gossip, especially after she and my sister had a public confrontation that ended with Janet slapping my sister. I considered getting a restraining order against Janet. She had become increasingly hostile, sending hateful messages, keying my sister's car, even breaking the windows of my store. But without concrete proof, it was difficult. I installed security cameras, hoping to catch her in the act. But for now, all I could do was try to avoid her. Amidst all of this, I adopted a kitten. I named her Sasha, and she became my little source of joy. She was playful, curious, and always by my side. In a way, she was exactly what I needed, something to care for, something to love that loved me back unconditionally. With time, my relationship with my father changed. He finally respected my boundaries. We would occasionally text, and when we saw each other in public, we were cordial. We even had coffee together once or twice. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me. I didn't need him to be a major part of my life. I just needed him to respect the space I had carved out for myself. My sister also began talking to our father again, though she refused to have anything to do with Janet. She made it clear that Janet was not welcome in her life. And my father seemed to accept that. My half-siblings, too, started coming around. They weren't to blame for what had happened, and I realized that I had been unfair to them. Slowly, we began to build a relationship, distant, but something. As for Larry, we never got back together. He still tried, showing up at my mother's house, calling me, sending flowers, but I was done. I couldn't trust him, and without trust, there was no foundation for a future together. His family, too, tried to convince me to take him back, but I stood my ground. I needed to move forward, and that meant leaving Larry in the past. Through therapy, I began to understand my own role in what had happened with my father. I had spent so many years blaming him for leaving, for abandoning me, But I realized that I had also pushed him away. I had refused every attempt he made to reconcile. Had shut him out at every turn. It wasn't all his fault, I had played a part. 2. Understanding that didn't mean I forgave him completely. But it did help me let go of some of the anger I had held onto for so long. Now, I'm focused on myself. My business is thriving, and I'm putting my energy into making it even more successful. I have Sasha, my little ball of fur, to keep me company. I have my sister, who has become my closest ally. And my mother, who has always been my rock. I'm learning to let go of the past. To forgive, not for others, but for myself. Life isn't perfect, and I know it never will be. There are still days when I feel the weight of everything that has happened. Days when the past seems too close, too overwhelming, but there are also days when I feel hopeful. When I see the future stretched out before me, full of possibilities, and those are the days I hold on to. This journey has taught me a lot about family, forgiveness, and the importance of boundaries. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. But that doesn't mean we have to let them keep hurting us. Setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's necessary. It's how we protect ourselves. How we ensure that the people in our lives are there because they love us, not because they want to control us. I've also learned that forgiveness is complicated. It's not always about letting someone back into your life. Sometimes, it's just about letting go of the anger. About accepting what happened and choosing to move forward. Forgiveness is for you, not for them. And finally, I've learned that it's okay to walk away from people who don't respect you. Whether it's a parent, a partner, or a friend, if someone isn't willing to support you, to stand by you, then they don't deserve a place in your life. It took me a long time to learn that lesson. But now that I have, I'm not letting it go. This story is far from over. My relationship with my father is still evolving. And who knows what the future holds. But for now, I'm content with where I am. I'm learning, growing, and finally, after so many years, I'm finding peace.